June 10, 1944, near Villers-Bocage, Normandy. The morning mist clings to the hedgerows, a damp shroud over the French countryside. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, diesel, and cordite. From a sunken lane, the beast emerges. Its tracks, a meter wide, crush the soft Normandy clay into deep, permanent scars. The low rumble of its 700-horsepower Maybach engine is a visceral vibration felt in the chest. Before it's heard by the ears, it is a Tiger Eye, number 212 of the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion. Sunlight glints dully on the immense slab-sided armor of its hull. The long, overhanging barrel of its 88mm gun sweeps the horizon with a predatory patience. Inside a hidden observation post, an American infantry lieutenant freezes, his field glasses fixed on the monolithic shape. His breath fogs the lens. He has heard the whispers. The intelligence reports that spoke of a German tank that could not be killed. It moves with a terrifying, deliberate slowness, an apex predator confident in its domain. Sherman tank, hidden in an orchard several hundred yards away, holds its fire. The crew knows the numbers. Their 75mm gun is useless frontally at this range. They are prey, waiting to be seen. The Tiger's turret groans as it traverses left, then stops. It has seen something. The huge gun elevates slightly. In the silence before the storm, the myth of its invincibility is a tangible, crushing weight. Then, from a concealed position on a wooded slope to the northeast, a different sound cuts the air, not the deep-throated roar of a tank cannon, but the sharper, faster crack of a high-velocity artillery piece. It is the sound of a calculated answer. A muzzle flash obscured by branches, a tungsten cord shell covers the distance in a blink. It strikes the Tiger's hull with a deafening metallic clang, a sound not of penetration but of violent, shocking impact. The myth flinches. For the first time, the hunters have become the hunted. The stage is set not for a duel of giants, but for a fundamental clash of philosophies, where American agility prepares to challenge German armor on the killing fields of Europe. The Tiger tank was not born from a desire for incremental improvement, but from a moment of profound psychological shock. In the summer of 1941, Operation Barbarossa slammed into the Soviet Union with devastating force. The German panzer divisions, masters of the blitzkrieg, cut through Soviet formations with practiced ease, but then they encountered something unexpected. Near the village of Emtsensk in October 1941, the German 4th Panzer Division ran headlong into a battalion of Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks. The result was a trauma. German 37 and 50 anti-tank guns pinged harmlessly off the Soviet sloped armor. Panzer III and IV shells failed to penetrate at anything but point-blank range. In contrast, the Soviet 76.2 guns could cripple German tanks at distances over 1,000 meters. A single KV-1, strategically immobilized, held up an entire German division for a day, absorbing hit after hit. The reports that reached Berlin were unequivocal. German technological superiority, the very cornerstone of the Wehrmacht's tactical confidence, had been shattered. The response was not a tweak, but a revolution in design philosophy. The Heereswaffenamt, the German Army's weapons agency, issued a dire requirement: breakthrough tank of unprecedented power and protection. The design firms of Henschel and Porsche were given a brutally simple mandate: the new vehicle must carry the most powerful anti-tank gun in the world, be armored heavily enough to be immune to all enemy guns at all but the closest ranges, and be ready for the battlefield within a year. The Henschel design, the VK45.01H, would become the Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger. OSF, it was a machine built around its weapon, the 8.8 cm KW K36L56. This was not a purpose-built tank gun, but a brilliant adaptation of the legendary FLA K-36 anti-aircraft cannon. The 88's high muzzle velocity and heavy shell gave it terrifying armor piercing capabilities. It could punch through over 100 m of armor at 1,000 meters distance from which most Allied tanks could not even hope to scratch the Tiger's paint. To carry this weapon, the Tiger required a fortress. Its armor was not sloped, a lesson curiously ignored from the T-34, but it was thick. The frontal glacis was a monolithic 100 in plate. The turret face was 120. This was rolled homogeneous armor plate of exceptional quality, face hardened to cause incoming shells to shatter. It weighed 57 tons, a behemoth that strained German engineering, logistics, and bridges to their limits. Its battlefield debut was carefully stage-managed for maximum psychological effect. In September 1942, 4 early production Tigers were committed to the Leningrad front. Near the village of Mga, in muddy, constrained forests, they performed poorly. 2 were immobilized by mechanical failures, and 1 was captured intact by the Soviets. But the Germans learned, when the Tiger was properly deployed in open country with infantry support, the myth ignited. The true spark came not in Russia, but in the desert. In Tunisia, in early 1943, the Tiger found its ideal early-stage opponents, the undergunned American M3 Ley and M4 Sherman and the British Churchill and Crusader tanks. At Longstop Hill, a single Tiger, commanded by SS Oberscharführer Rababi, will reportedly knocked out over a dozen Allied tanks without loss. The stories, amplified by survivalist reports from shaken Allied crews, spread like wildfire. The Tiger fear, Tiger Schrecken, was born. It was a weapon not just of metal and explosive, but of psychology. Its mere reported presence could paralyze an advance, cause entire units to dig in, and force commanders to commit disproportionate resources to its supposed location. By the time the Allies invaded Sicily and Italy, the Tiger had transcended its material form. It was an invincible specter, a rolling testament to German engineering and martial prowess for the young American tank crews and infantrymen boarding their transports. For Normandy in 1944, the Tiger was the monster waiting in the hedgerows. They had been told it was nearly impervious. They believed it, the Wehrmacht having cultivated this aura of invincibility, believed it too. But across the Atlantic, a different doctrine had been brewing, one designed not to create an unkillable champion, but to systematically hunt and destroy one. This American answer would not be found in a thicker armor plate, but in a radical idea. Speed, agility, and the first devastating shot. Yes, continue. Section 2, America's Answer. While German industry was forging its singular, heavyweight champion, American military thought was moving in a profoundly different direction. The U.S. Army's interwar philosophy was not built on the tank versus tank duel. Tanks, in the American view, were instruments of exploitation, mechanized cavalry meant to rupture enemy lines and wreak havoc in the rear. The job of destroying enemy armor was to be handled by separate, dedicated branch, the tank destroyer. This doctrine was born from the traumatic lessons of the Battle of France in 1940. U.S. observers watched in alarm as German panzer divisions, spearheaded by masses of tanks, sliced through Allied defenses. The conclusion drawn was that massed enemy armor created a tank panic that could collapse entire sectors. The counter, they theorized, was not to build heavier tanks to meet the enemy head-on, but to create a mobile, powerful anti-tank reserve that could be rushed to threaten points. Speed and firepower were paramount. Armor was secondary, even detrimental. The creed was crystallized in the tank destroyer motto: seek, strike, destroy. The physical manifestation of this creed began with expedience: the M3 gun motor. Carriage mounting a 75 gun on a half-track was a stopgap. The M10 gun motor carriage, arriving in 1942, was the first true embodiment of the doctrine. It took the reliable chassis of the M4 Sherman, but replaced the heavy turret with an open-topped pentagonal one, saving critical weight. Its main weapon was the 3-inch gun M7, derivative of a heavy anti-aircraft gun, capable of firing a stout 76.2 armor-piercing round. The M10 was fast, relatively light, and carried a gun that could, theoretically, challenge the new German threats. but its open top left the crew vulnerable to artillery, airbursts, and infantry, and the 3-inch gun was already showing signs of being overmatched by the frontal armor of the latest German designs. The Doctrine's purest expression came next, the M18 Hellcat. It was a machine built around a single breathtaking characteristic, velocity. From the ground up, it was engineered not for protection but for escape. Its armor was wafer-thin, barely sufficient to stop rifle-caliber fire and shell splinters, but its weight was a mere 20 tons, less than half that of a Tiger. Powered by a radial aircraft engine, the Hellcat could hit 55 miles per hour on roads, making it the fastest-tracked armored fighting vehicle of the war. Its 76 mm1 gun, a high-velocity improvement over the M10's weapon, was mounted in an open turret. The Hellcat was the ultimate ambush predator. Its tactical manual preached shoot and scoot, fire from a concealed position, then use its blistering speed to displace before enemy return fire could be targeted. It was the antithesis of the Tiger's ponderous, imposing dominance. Yet, as intelligence reports from Tunisia and Italy confirmed the fearsome capabilities of the Tiger and the new Panther tank, a cold realization settled over the tank destroyer force. The 76 mm gun, while capable against most targets, struggled against the frontal armor of a Tiger at anything beyond point-blank range. The kill relied on flank shots or superior tactical positioning, a tall order against a well-commanded German heavy tank. The creed of firepower was facing a crisis. The answer was the 90 mm gun. Like the German 88, it was an adaptation of a superb anti-aircraft weapon, the M1. Its shell was heavier, its muzzle velocity higher, and its armor-piercing capability, especially with the new tungsten-cored HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, was a leap forward. Mounting this weapon required a new vehicle. The result was the M36 Jackson, using the hull of the M10A1, itself based on the later model Sherman. The M36 featured a new, slightly more protected turret to house the massive 90 mm gun. It was heavier and slower than the Hellcat, but it carried the first American tank-killing weapon that could look the Tiger's 88 in the eye with confidence. It entered production in the summer of 1944, just in time for the brutal battles in the European hedgerows. Thus, by D-Day, two opposing philosophies were on a collision course. One offered a slow, heavily armored knight, designed to dominate the battlefield through sheer intimidating power. The other offered a fleet of nimble, specialized hunters banking on tactical agility, first-shot advantage, and a new generation of guns. The myth of invincibility was about to be tested not by a single rival beast, but by a system, a doctrine, and the cold mathematics of ballistic physics. The open fields and narrow lanes of Normandy would become the proving ground. For the 5 men sealed within its steel carapace, the Tiger was not an invincible myth, but a complex, demanding, and exhausting environment. It was a realm of extreme contrasts, immense power coupled with profound vulnerability, technical sophistication, burdened by mechanical fragility. The commander, perched in his cupola, wielded the tank's true strength, its optics. The Zeiss Turmzilfernrohr TZF 9B binocular sight offered a crystal-clear, wide field of view, allowing for exceptional target acquisition. The gunner, to his front and below, peered through his own refined sight, aligning the crosshairs with a target the commander had designated. The synergy between them, when well-trained, was devastating. They could identify and engage an enemy vehicle at ranges beyond 2,000 meters, a distance from which the target often appeared as a vague, static shape. This was the Tiger's preferred battleground, the long, killing shot. But within this fortress, the atmosphere was claustrophobic and oppressive. The interior reeked of diesel, sweat, hot grease, and cordite. The roar of the Maybach HL 230 engine was a constant, deafening drone, making communication through the intercom shouted affair. The sheer mass of the vehicle meant every movement was a slow, ponderous event. The hydraulically assisted turret traverse, while smoother than the Manual systems in earlier tanks was still leisurely compared to the hand-cranked or fast. Hydraulic systems of Allied vehicles, a full 360-degree rotation, could take over a minute. The Tiger's weight was its tactical Achilles heel, felt acutely by its crew, not every French road or bridge could support 57 tons. Movement was channelized, predictable, in soft ground. The wide tracks saved it from immobility, but the immense strain on the final drives and transmission was relentless. The crew lived in constant dread of a mechanical failure, a thrown track, a seized gearbox, a burned-out clutch. More Tigers were lost to breakdowns and abandonment from lack of fuel than to Allied guns. To be a Tiger crewman was to be a master mechanic as much as a warrior. Hours were spent with wrenches and manuals just to keep the beast moving. And then there was the fear of the unseen flank. The side and rear armor, though still substantial, were vulnerable to the guns now fielded by Allied tank destroyers and later model tanks. Every hedgerow, every woodline concealed a potential ambush. The crew's worldview was a narrow one, constrained by vision blocks and periscopes. They knew their frontal armor was legendary, but they also knew a side shot from a well-placed 76 more 17-pounder could turn their steel sanctuary into a tomb in an instant. Their confidence was real, but it was a calculated confidence, tempered by the knowledge that their invincibility was directional and that the battlefield was rarely so courteous as to offer only frontal engagements. This human reality inside the legend, the skilled crew leveraging superior optics and gun against a backdrop of mechanical anxiety and tactical limitation, forms the critical counterpart to the Allied perspective. They were not faceless operators of an unstoppable machine, but highly trained professionals in a system with profound exploitable weaknesses. The American tank destroyer was not merely a vehicle, it was the physical incarnation of a radical tactical belief. Its design was a direct rejection of the German philosophy of the monolithic armored panzer, where German doctrine sought to create an impervious, mobile strongpoint. American doctrine sought to create a surgical instrument. Every rivet, every horsepower, every sacrificed millimeter of armor on vehicles like the M18 Hellcat was a conscious choice in service of a core principle: mobility is life. This creed was codified in the Field Manual 18.5, Tank Destroyer Field Manual. It preached a trinity of tenets. First, intelligence. Tank destroyer battalions were to be the eyes of the Corps, using reconnaissance to locate enemy armor concentrations before they struck. Second, mass. Once a threat was identified, TD battalions, held at Corps or Army level, would not dribble units into the fight. They would concentrate their firepower from multiple, concealed positions onto the enemy spearhead. Third, aggression. The manual stated, the tank destroyer is essentially an offensive weapon. It attacks. This did not mean reckless charges, but the aggressive seizure of key terrain for ambush and the relentless exploitation of an enemy's flank once engaged. The vehicle designs were textbooks of this philosophy. The M10's open-topped turret was not just a weight-saving measure, it provided the commander with an unparalleled 360-degree situational awareness, allowing him to spot for threats and targets faster than any tank commander peering through vision blocks. The M18 Hellcat took this to its logical extreme. Its paper-thin armor was a statement: if you are seen, you have already failed. Survival depended on not being hit at all. Its staggering speed was its armor, allowing it to execute the doctrine's sacred maneuver, the shoot-and scoot. Hellcat platoon would race to a pre-scouted firing position, unleash a volley, and be moving to a secondary position before the dust of their first shot had settled or enemy artillery could be called down. But this creed demanded a new kind of soldier, TD crewmen, especially in the open. Topped M10 and M18 were exposed. They wore tanker helmets but fought like artillerymen, vulnerable to snipers, mortars, and tree bursts. They had to be masters of camouflage, of terrain judgment, and of gunnery under pressure. They operated not as individual knights but as packs of wolves, relying on coordination, communication, and mutual support. A single TD might spot, but a section or platoon would kill, cross-firing on a target to ensure a flank was presented to at least one of them. This doctrine, however, faced a brutal test in the close country of Europe, the ideal TD. Battlefield was the open plain of theoretical exercises, Normandy's bocage, a labyrinth of ancient hedgerows, sunken lanes, and small fields was its antithesis, engagement. Ranges shrunk to mere dozens of yards, negating the TD's preferred standoff. Advantage, the need for speed was often constrained to a single, muddy lane. Here, the Creed had to adapt. TDs were often used as static pillboxes, dug into hedgerow bases. Their guns covering a single kill zone, they became direct fire support for infantry, blasting open hedgerows with high explosive or engaging German fortifications. The pure doctrine of mobility was bent but not broken. It evolved into a gritty, flexible practicality where the TD's speed allowed it to be rushed to plug breaches in the line. And its powerful gun remained the most reliable tool for cracking open a panther's turret or a tiger's flank when the opportunity, however brief, presented itself. The Creed was being tempered in fire, moving from theoretical elegance to hardened battlefield reality. The clash between the Tiger and the tank destroyer was ultimately decided by a cold mathematical dialogue, the conversation between a shell and a plate of steel. This was a duel of metallurgy, ballistics, and industrial ingenuity, fought at distances measured hundreds of meters and milliseconds. On the German side, the 8.8 cm KW K36L56 was the cornerstone of the Tigers. Dominance, its genius lay in its formidable muzzle velocity, approximately 773 meters per second for its standard PZGR, 39 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap APCBC shell. This kinetic energy, applied to a 10.2 kg projectile, delivered devastating force. The shell's design was sophisticated, a hardened steel core for penetration, a softer steel cap to reduce shattering on impact, and a ballistic cap to maintain velocity over distance. Against the vertical or lightly sloped armor of early and mid-war Allied tanks, it was brutally effective, capable of penetration exceeding 120 m of rolled homogeneous armor at 500 meters. It turned the Tiger into a long-range sniper, able to engage targets far beyond the effective range of most Allied return fire. The Tiger's armor was its other half of the equation, the face-hardened steel used on its frontal plates was a masterpiece of German metallurgy. Through a complex heat treatment process, the surface of the armor was made extremely hard, designed to cause incoming capped shells to deform, shatter, or bite and deflect. Behind this hard face was a tougher, more ductile interior to absorb spalling. This combination made the frontal 100 mm hull and 120 mm turret far more resistant than their raw thickness suggested. Early Allied 75 and even 76 mm APCBC rounds would often shatter on impact, leaving only a silvered scar called a splash on the Tiger's hide, a visual testament to its supposed invincibility. The American response evolved in stages. The 3-inch gun M7 on the early M10 fired a 7.6 kg projectile at 793 ms, ballistically similar to the 88 but with a lighter shell. Carrying less kinetic energy, its APCBC round could penetrate a Tiger's side armor at reasonable combat ranges, but the front remained a formidable problem. The 76 M1 gun, mounted on later M10s, the M18 Hellcat, and upgunned Shermans, was a significant improvement. A higher velocity, up to 792 ms for HVAP, 1030 ms for its rare tungsten core, and better shell design gave it a fighting chance. Its standard APCBC round could theoretically penetrate the Tiger's front plate at very close ranges under ideal conditions, but it was not a reliable solution. The true equalizer was the 90 mm M3 gun of the M36 Jackson. Ballistically, it was the American counterpart to the 88. its standard 10.9 kg APC-BC projectile, fired at 810 ms, delivered energy comparable to the KWK-36, but the game-changer was its HVAP. High-velocity armor-piercing ammunition known to crews as hypershot. This round used a tungsten carbide core, lighter and smaller than a full-bore shell, encased in a lightweight aluminum body. It was fired at a blistering 1020 ms. This tiny, dense core sacrificed high explosive payload for sheer penetrative power. On impact, it acted like a kinetic dart capable of punching through the Tiger's formidable frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. When an M36 crew loaded HVAP, they were no longer hunters hoping for a flank shot, they were duelists capable of a frontal confrontation. Thus, the technological duel reached its climax. The Tiger's face-hardened armor, designed to defeat conventional steel-capped shot, was vulnerable to the new physics of ultra-high velocity, small-caliber penetrators. The myth of invincibility was not broken by a bigger hammer but by a faster, sharper nail. The battlefield became a deadly algebra where engagement range, angle of shot, and the specific ammunition in the breach determined the outcome, finally reducing the legendary Tiger to a set of solvable if deadly ballistic problems. The ultimate judge in the duel between the Tiger and the tank destroyer was not a general or a designer, but the unforgiving landscape of Europe itself. The environment acted as a brutal arbiter, selectively amplifying the weaknesses of one system while accentuating the latent strengths of the other. The war was not fought on a flat, featureless plain, and the terrain of Western Europe systematically dismantled the Tiger's ideal conditions for dominance. Consider the Tiger's optimal battlefield: the vast, open steppes of Russia or the rolling deserts of North Africa. Here, its superb optics and long-range gun allowed it to function as a mobile fortress, engaging enemy formations at distances where they were effectively blind and harmless. It could use its power to dominate avenues of approach, its weight less of an issue on firm, open ground. In this environment, it truly was a near invincible force multiplier. Western Europe, from the summer of 1944 onward, offered no such courtesy. Normandy's bocage was a nightmarish reversal. The dense, towering hedgerows built on earthen berms centuries old compartmentalized the land into thousands of small, blind parcels. Visibility was often limited to the width of a single field, 50 to 200 yards. The Tiger's greatest asset, its long-range gun, was rendered irrelevant. Every advance was a blind push through a narrow gap, with the potential for an ambush at point-blank range around every corner. The Tiger's immense weight and length became severe liabilities. Maneuvering in confined lanes was a tortuous process of back-and-forth shuffling. A thrown track in a sunken lane could block an entire advance for hours. The environment forced the Tiger into a close-quarters brawl, a fight for which it was not designed. The hilly, river-cut spine of Italy presented a different but equally cruel challenge. Mountain roads were narrow, winding, and fragile. Bridges had to be meticulously scouted for weight limits, channelizing German armored movements into predictable choke points. An advancing Tiger column was a slow, noisy, and obvious affair, easily reported by partisan observers and Allied air reconnaissance. This allowed Allied commanders, including tank destroyer battalions, to preposition forces on dominating terrain. A Tiger struggling up a mountain pass could find itself engaged from a flanking hillside by TDs it could not see or easily bring its gun to bear upon. The environment turned the hunter into a vulnerable target in a shooting gallery. Even the forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, which offered some concealment, worked against the Tiger's geometry. Dense woods restricted turret traverse, and massive trees could immobilize a tank as effectively as a mine. Frozen narrow roads again created fatal funnels. The celebrated ambush by the M18 Hellcat of the 630th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the crossroads of Naval on December 1944 was a classic example of terrain mastery. The Hellcats used the concealment of woods and a railroad embankment to engage elements of the German Panzerlehr and 2nd Panzer divisions, including heavy tanks at close range. Their speed allowed them to dash from one firing position to another along the forest edge, engaging, displacing, and re-engaging, using the terrain to multiply their combat power against heavier opponents. For the tank destroyer, this same brutal terrain offered opportunities. The bocage, while limiting their own long-range fire, provided perfect concealment for hull-down ambush positions. A Hellcat or M36 could be hidden behind a hedgerow, only its gun exposed, waiting for a German tank to bull its way through a gap. The short engagement ranges minimized the ballistic advantage of the German 88 and maximized the penetrative power of the American 76 and 90 guns. The need for rapid repositioning made the Hellcat's speed not a luxury but a lifesaver. In Italy, the TD's lighter weight meant it could use goat trails and secondary routes to achieve flanking positions impossible for a Tiger. The environment which hampered the German Schwerpunkt enabled the American doctrine of agile, opportunistic defense. The battlefield itself had chosen sides, favoring not raw power but adaptability, tactical agility, and the first, well-aimed shot from an unexpected direction. Beyond the steel and explosives, a quieter, more cerebral battle determined the outcomes of countless engagements, the war of intelligence and expectation. This was the conflict between the cultivated myth of the tiger and the cold, analytical reality being compiled in American field manuals and after-action reports. The Wehrmacht's psychological weapon, tiger fear, was gradually being disarmed by a systematic campaign of education. Initially, the myth held devastating power. In Tunisia and Italy, vague reports of a tiger, a term often misapplied by Allied troops to any German tank with a long gun, including Panzer IVs and Panthers, could cause disproportionate alarm. Units would report being attacked by tigers when none were present, diverting resources and shaking confidence. This psychological shadow was as potent as the tank itself, causing hesitation, premature withdrawal, and a willingness to believe in its near-supernatural capabilities. The U.S. Army, however, was uniquely positioned to combat this. It was a learning institution, pragmatic and data-driven. The Tank Destroyer School at Fort Hood, Texas, and later the Military Intelligence Service, began a relentless effort to demystify the enemy. Recognition manuals were updated and disseminated with painstaking detail. The Tiger's distinctive boxy hull, its wide, overlapping road wheels, the muzzle brake of its 88 gun, crews were drilled to differentiate it from the more common Panther, which had sloped armor and a different road wheel configuration. Knowing what you were facing was the first step to killing it. More crucially, after-action reports from the front lines, technical evaluations of knocked out or captured tigers, and intelligence from Allied technical units like the British School of Tank Technology were compiled, analyzed, and circulated. These reports stripped away the legend and revealed the machine's empirical truths. They detailed the Tiger's weak spots, the relatively flat and vulnerable driver's front plate, the vision ports on the cupola, the thin armor on the turret roof vulnerable to airburst or high-angle fire, and above all, the sides and rear. They analyzed the effectiveness of different U.S. and British guns and ammunition against specific plates at specific ranges. This data was transformed into field manuals and tactical bulletins. By the time of Normandy, many TD and tank battalion commanders possessed Tiger annexes to their operation orders. These were not vague warnings, but specific tactical directives. They stated, factually, the frontal armor is impervious to our 75 man, highly resistant to 76 mat ranges over 300 yards, engage from the flank, use terrain for ambush, fire at the tracks to immobilize, then maneuver for a killing shot, work in pairs. One to distract, one to kill. The mystique was being replaced by a tactical flowchart. This intelligence was force multiplied by the arrival of the M36 Jackson with 90 HVAP ammunition, gunnery tables showing the 90 HVAP's penetration values. Against the Tiger's frontal hull and turret armor were not just numbers, they were a psychological inoculation. They gave crews concrete mathematical confidence in M36. Gunner knew that if he could get a clean shot at under 1,000 yards with a precious round of HVAP, he could win. The engagement shifted from an act of desperation to one of calculated ballistics. The ultimate expression of this intelligence victory was the dissemination of known German tactical habits. Reports noted that German heavy tank battalions, conscious of their machines' limitations, often used them as semi-static strongpoints or for short range counterattacks down predictable routes. American TD units learned to scout these likely avenues, pre-register artillery on them, and establish hidden ambush positions. Covering them, the Tiger, for all its power, often fought within a predictable doctrinal box. American intelligence was systematically mapping the dimensions of that box, turning the mythic monster into a known, and therefore manageable, threat on the battlefield. Orders. The fear remained. Any sane soldier feared the 88's blast, but the paralyzing belief in invincibility had been replaced by a hard-earned, procedural respect. Beneath the tactical and technological duel lay a fundamental, war-deciding reality: the staggering industrial disparity between the United States and Nazi Germany. The clash between the Tiger and the tank destroyer was a microcosm of this greater truth. Contest between a handcrafted, resource-intensive masterpiece and a mass-produced, strategically efficient tool. This chasm shaped not only how many machines reached the battlefield but how they were used, maintained, and ultimately replaced. The Tiger I was the antithesis of mass production. Its construction was a lesson. Complexity and expense. The face-hardened armor plates required specialized furnaces and precise, time-consuming heat treatment. Its Maybach HL-230 engine, while powerful, was temperamental and required skilled maintenance. The intricate, overlapping roadwheel system provided superb weight distribution, but was a nightmarish logistical puzzle. Replacing an inner wheel could require the removal of up to 9 outer wheels. Final production figures tell the definitive story. From August 1942 to August 1944, German industry produced only 1,347 Tiger I tanks. It was a boutique weapon, a luxury item in a total war of attrition. American war production operated on a different celestial plane. The philosophy was one of standardization, interchangeability, and volume. The M10 Wolverine utilized the chassis and automotive components of the mass-produced M4 Sherman. The M18 Hellcat shared engine components with aircraft and other armored vehicles. The M36 Jackson used the M10A1 hull, and its 90mm gun was adapted from the existing anti-aircraft arsenal. This was not merely efficient, it was strategically elegant. It meant that broken transmission in an M10 could potentially be replaced with one from a Sherman in a depot miles away. It meant that production lines could shift with relative ease, and that training and maintenance followed standardized procedures. The numbers are stark. The United States built over 6,400 M10 tank destroyers, over 2,500 M18 Hellcats, over 1,400 M36 Jacksons. Combined, that is over 10,300 dedicated tank destroyers, not counting the thousands of upgunned Sherman tanks that also performed the tank-killing role. For every Tiger I that rolled onto a railway flat car in Germany, nearly 8 American tank destroyers of various types were being shipped from ports like New York and Baltimore. This industrial reality dictated strategy. German commanders were forced to husband their Tigers, deploying them in small elite battalions as fire brigades rushed from crisis point to crisis point. They could not afford to risk them in reckless assaults or as mere infantry support. Losses, whether from combat or breakdown, were irreplaceable. Each Tiger lost was a catastrophic depletion of a finite resource. In contrast, the American tank destroyer was a consumable asset within a vast system. Battalion could lose several vehicles in a fierce engagement and be back to strength. With replacements from the rear within days, this allowed for aggressive, even, audacious tactics. A platoon leader could risk an M18 in a high-speed reconnaissance. Knowing the vehicle's value was in the intelligence it gathered and the speed with which it could disengage, not in its irreplaceable armor plate. Losses were regrettable, but expected, and the system was designed to absorb them. The industrial chasm thus created a profound psychological asymmetry for the Tiger. Crew, their vehicle was a rare and precious sword, to be wielded with supreme skill, but also with profound caution. For the TD crew, their vehicle was a robust, capable, and ultimately replaceable instrument in a vast arsenal. This difference in scale and mindset meant that even in engagements where a single Tiger might kill several TDs, the tactical and strategic calculus was not in Germany's favor. The Americans could afford the arithmetic of attrition. The Germans could not. The last great myth of the Tiger, that its qualitative superiority could overcome quantitative inferiority, shattered against the unyielding production schedules of Detroit, Philadelphia, and Lima. The myth of the Tiger did not fall in a single cataclysmic battle. It was eroded, shot by shot, engagement by engagement, in a bloody curriculum administered across the hedgerows of Normandy, the hills of Italy, and the frozen forests of the Ardennes. For the American tank destroyer crews, the summer and autumn of 1944 was a brutal postgraduate course in armored warfare, paid for in steel and blood. This was the phase of costly, necessary education. The lessons began immediately after D-Day, on June 13, 1944, near the village of Cairnton. A platoon of M10s from the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion encountered elements of the German Panzerlehr Division, including at least one Tiger, in the close bocage. The engagement was sudden and vicious. The M10s, attempting to fight accordance with their mobile doctrine, were cut down. Their 3-inch guns failed to stop the German heavy tanks frontally, and in the confined terrain, their mobility was neutralized. The survivors learned a grim foundational lesson. In Normandy, the textbook shoot-and-scoot was often impossible. Survival depended on choosing the first position with utmost care, because there might not be a chance for a second. Similar bloody tutorials occurred daily. At Villers-Bocage on June 13, the world witnessed the Tiger's destructive potential in the famous action by SS Obersturmführer Michael Whitman. But in the days that followed, British anti-tank guns and tanks, employing careful defensive tactics, would immobilize and destroy several of the battalion's Tigers, including Whitman's own. The message, though hard one, was clear. Even the most feared Panzer ace was vulnerable to a well-prepared, disciplined defense. The Tiger was not supernatural. It could be tracked, trapped, and killed. For the U.S. forces, the education was synthesized into new, grimly practical tactics. Tank destroyers began operating more intimately with infantry and tanks. They would be dug in, their hulls recessed into the base of a hedgerow, only their turrets showing. Becoming stationary but heavily armed strongpoints, reconnaissance became paramount, not just to find the enemy, but to find the perfect killing lane. Crews learned to husband their precious HVAP rounds, using standard APCBC for softer targets and saving the tungsten core for the moment. A Tiger's distinctive boxy silhouette filled their gun sight. They also learned the critical importance of the first shot in a close-range duel where the Tiger's 88 could obliterate any TD with a single hit. Firing first was not just an advantage, it was the only chance. This placed a supreme premium on camouflage, patience, and fire discipline. A crew might wait for hours, allowing German infantry and lighter vehicles to pass, holding fire until the high-value target, a Tiger or Panther, presented its flank or paused in a vulnerable position. The crack of their gun was the end of a long, silent calculation. This period was marked by high losses and fierce frustration, reports from TD battalions speak of rounds shattering on the frontal armor of Tigers, of crews feeling outgunned and underprotected, but within these after-action reports, a new understanding was crystallizing. They were learning the Tiger's patterns, its limitations, and its vulnerabilities. The invincible monster was being systematically studied, its behavior cataloged. The education was painful, but it was creating a generation of veteran crews who no longer feared the legend but respected and knew how to exploit the machine. They were graduating from theory to hardened experience, and the final exam was coming. The arrival of the M36 Jackson with its 90mm gun would provide them with the answer sheet. The turning point was not a single thunderclap, but a gradual, pervasive shift in the atmosphere of the battlefield, a hardening of Allied resolve and a demonstrable erosion of the Tiger's aura. By late summer and autumn of 1944, the costly education began to pay dividends. The arrival of the M36 Jackson in meaningful numbers provided the material key, but it was the veteran TD crews, now wise to the Tiger's ways, who turned that key in the lock. A grim equilibrium was established where the Tiger remained a deadly and respected foe, but was no longer an unconquerable one. The shift manifested in a series of sharp, conclusive actions that served as proof of concept. In the Bocage country near Saint-Lô in July, M10s of the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, working in concert with infantry and artillery, began to achieve notable successes. They would use indirect artillery fire or mortar smoke to blind and disorient German tank advances, then engage the confused panzers at close range from hidden flank positions. The reports changed tone, no longer just accounts of shells bouncing, but terse confirmations of Tiger, burned, or Panther, knocked out by side shot. A more definitive demonstration occurred during the battle for Aachen in October. In the urban rubble, where engagement ranges were often under 100 yards, the Tigers' advantages evaporated. Here, M10s and M36s, used as direct-fire assault guns, proved brutally effective. A Jackson of the 654th Tank Destroyer Battalion famously engaged a Tiger at near point-blank range in the city's streets. The 90mm HVAP round struck the Tiger's lower side hull as it attempted to pivot around a corner, igniting its ammunition. In the close quarters meat grinder of a city fight, the TD's faster turret traverse and the sheer penetrating power of the 90 often decided engagements before the Tigers' superior optics or gun range could become factors. The most symbolic blow to the myth came in the open country of Lorraine during the Battle of Aracourt, September 1829, 1944. Here, the German 5th Panzer Army launched a major counterattack against General Patton's advancing Third Army. The German force included a significant number of the new, fearsome Panther tanks, as well as Tiger IIs and Tiger is of the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. Facing them were the M18 Hellcats of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion and the M4 Shermans of the 4th Armored Division. The terrain was a series of open ridges and valleys, often shrouded in thick morning fog. The American crews used this fog to their supreme advantage. The Hellcats, true to their creed, would wait silently in hull-down positions on the reverse slopes. As German panzers emerged from the mist into the valleys below, the TDs would open fire, aiming for tracks and flank shots. Then, they would use their speed to retreat over the crest before the Germans could pinpoint their location, only to reappear minutes later at another point along the ridge. The M18's speed and the 76mm gun's adequacy against Panther side armor proved devastating. The M4 Shermans, using similar tactical agility and working in concert with the TDs, engaged aggressively. Over several days of fighting, the Americans shattered the German attack, destroying over 250 German armored vehicles at a fraction of their own loss. While not all were Tigers, the battle proved that agile, well-commanded American combined arms teams could defeat The latest and best of German armor in open combat, the myth of qualitative inevitability was broken. By the time of the Battle of the Bulge in December, the psychological transformation was largely complete when King Tigers of the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion rolled toward Bostonia. They were met not by panic but by prepared defenses. At Novel, just north of Bostonia, M18 Hellcats of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion executed classic delaying action, using the wooded, rolling terrain to ambush, disengage, and ambush the advancing German spearhead, including heavy tanks. They inflicted critical delays and losses. The reports from the Bulge are telling. They speak of engaging and destroying heavy enemy armor with matter-of-fact professionalism. The terminology shifts from the fearful Tiger to the clinical Mark VI or heavy enemy tank. The equilibrium had been reached. The Tiger was still a supremely dangerous weapon. The hands of a skilled crew, a frontal engagement at long range remained suicidal for any Allied vehicle, but the tank destroyer force, equipped with the right tools, hardened by experience and operating within a superior combined arms system, had systematically dismantled the myth of its invincibility. They had proven that the Tiger could be outthought, outmaneuvered, and killed. The monster had been measured and found to be mortal. The remainder of the war would see the refinement of this deadly balance as the last of the German heavy tanks fought a desperate, losing battle against an enemy that had learned not to fear them. The ultimate verdict on the duel between the Tiger and the American tank destroyer is found not in anecdotal heroics, but in the cold, aggregate arithmetic of industrial warfare. The statistics reveal a story of German tactical brilliance crushed by strategic and logistical failure, and of an American system that, while imperfect, proved devastatingly effective in the aggregate. The production disparity is the foundational statistic. As noted, 1,347 Tiger IS were built, compared to over 10,300 dedicated American tank destroyers. This 1:8 ratio is the fundamental strategic reality, but the operational loss ratios are more revealing. Exact tank-for-tank kill-loss records are notoriously difficult to verify from wartime claims, but broader analyses of German heavy tank battalions paint a consistent picture. A study of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, one of the most experienced Tiger units, shows that of its total strength, a staggering percentage of losses were due to mechanical breakdown and abandonment, often over 50% in periods of retreat. Tigers were lost to bridges that collapsed beneath them, to final drives that shattered under stress, to simple lack of fuel. They were not just destroyed by enemy fire, they were defeated by their own engineering complexity and the collapsing German logistical network. When engaged in combat, a well-positioned Tiger could achieve remarkable local ratios. There are verified instances of individual Tigers claiming 10 or more Allied vehicles in an engagement, but these tactical triumphs were almost never operationally decisive. They were delaying actions, rarely capable of halting the relentless, multi-pronged Allied advance. For every Tiger that accounted for a dozen Allied tanks or TDs, a dozen more Allied vehicles were moving on another axis, and the crippled Tiger, if it survived, would likely have to be destroyed by its own crew during the next retreat when it ran out of fuel or broke down. The true measure of the tank destroyer's success is not in a simplistic TDs versus Tigers kill count, but in their contribution to the overall destruction of German armored forces. The vast majority of German armor on the Western Front by 1944 consisted not of Tigers but of Panzer IVs, Sturmgeschütz III assault guns, and Panthers. The tank destroyer force was lethally effective against these more numerous threats. The 76 and 90 guns made short work of Panzer IVs and Stugs, while the agile TDs were perfect predators for the Panther, whose formidable frontal armor was paired with vulnerable side armor. By aggressively engaging and destroying the medium panzers and assault guns that formed the backbone of German armored divisions, the TDs systematically attrited the enemy's ability to mount coherent counterattacks. They bled the German army of its armored strength, leaving the rare, fuel-guzzling Tigers isolated and strategically irrelevant. Furthermore, the TD's flexibility made it a constant, pervasive threat. They were used as mobile artillery for infantry support, as pillboxes in static defense, and as reconnaissance screens. Their value extended far beyond tank kills. They provided the frontline commander with a fast, hard-hitting reserve that could be deployed to blunt local penetrations, the very role envisioned in their original 1940 doctrine. In this, they succeeded enormously. The German after-action reports from Normandy onward increasingly complain not just of jobos, fighter bombers, but of devastating, accurate anti-tank fire appearing suddenly on their flanks from unseen positions, the signature of a well-handled tank destroyer platoon. The statistical truth, therefore, is one of asymmetric effectiveness. The Tiger was a sublime tactical weapon of limited strategic impact. The American tank destroyer was a versatile, strategically sound weapon system that excelled in the combined arms environment of the Western Front. The myth of the Tiger's battlefield invincibility was ultimately rendered moot by the unglamorous, overwhelming mathematics of production, logistics, and systemic tactical flexibility. The Tigers died not only from penetrations to their side armor, but from a lack of spare parts, from empty fuel tanks, and from being outnumbered on a battlefield where numbers in the end dictated the only result that mattered: victory. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the swift demobilization of the U.S. tank destroyer force seemed to signal a doctrinal dead end. The separate tank destroyer branch was disbanded in 1946. On the surface, it appeared the experiment had failed, its lessons absorbed back into the armored and infantry branches, but this view is superficial. The true legacy of the tank destroyer was not an institution, but a set of indelible principles that would fundamentally reshape post-war armored warfare, directly influencing the design and tactics of the main battle tanks that would dominate the Cold War. The first principle to be critically re-examined was the mobility over armor creed. The war had proven its merits in the offensive, fluid battles of 1944-45, but had also exposed its terrible cost in static or close-to-range fighting. The pure, open-top tank destroyer was judged too vulnerable on the integrated, atomic battlefield of the future. However, the core idea, that survivability is achieved through not being hit, rather than by simply absorbing hits, endured. It evolved. It translated into a relentless pursuit of a lower silhouette, the integration of stabilizers for accurate firing on the move, and later advanced optics and fire control systems to guarantee the first-hit advantage. The M18 Hellcat's spirit lived on in the design philosophy of tanks like the French AMX-13 and conceptually in the emphasis on agility in early Cold War designs. Conversely, the German Tiger philosophy of extreme weight and armor was seen as a strategic cul-de-sac. It produced magnificent but unsustainable weapons that broke bridges, strained logistics, and could not be produced in decisive numbers. The post-war lesson absorbed by both NATO and Warsaw Pact designers was for balanced design. The main battle tank MBT concept, epitomized by the American M48 patent and the Soviet T-54-55, sought a golden triad: a powerful gun, adequate mobility, and sufficient armor, all within a weight limit that allowed for strategic deployability, mechanical reliability, and mass production. The Tiger's lesson was that a tank must be part of a system, not a singular, rarefied monument. The most profound legacy was in firepower and engagement doctrine. The tank destroyer's Racen Derder, the high-velocity, tank-killing gun, became the standard for all main battle tanks. The 9mm gun of the M36 set the benchmark, leading directly to the 9mm guns of the M47 and M48 patents. The emphasis on the first shot became the obsession of a generation of tank designers. This drove the development of rangefinders, then laser rangefinders, digital ballistic computers, and thermal sights, all technologies meant to replicate and exceed the Tiger's original advantage of seeing and hitting first, but now from within a balanced, universal tank. Furthermore, the TD's role was not abolished, but absorbed and specialized. The lightweight, airdroppable M56 Scorpion and M551 Sheridan of the Cold War carried the Hellcat's genes as fast, hard-hitting vehicles for the airborne. The concept of a dedicated tank destroyer re-emerged in the form of missile-armed armored vehicles like the M9 ITV improved tow vehicle, which used long-range top attack missiles to engage enemy armor from beyond the reach of a tank's main gun. Technological evolution of the Schutan-Scoot doctrine. Finally, the organizational lesson was one of integration. The war proved that no single weapon system, no matter how potent, could operate alone. The tank destroyers' greatest successes came when integrated with infantry, artillery, tanks, and air power. This became the bedrock of NATO combined arms doctrine. The separate branch was gone, but the imperative of close, trained cooperation between all arms to defeat heavy armor was permanently etched into modern military practice. Thus, the Tiger and the tank destroyer did not vanish. They fused. Their clash on the battlefields of Europe forged the DNA of the modern main battle tank, a balance of firepower, mobility, and protection, obsessed with winning the first-shot duel, and utterly dependent on its place within an integrated combat team. The monsters and the hunters of World War II had, through the brutal process of combat, given birth to a new, more lethal and more balanced generation of armored warfare. The story of the Tiger tank and the American tank destroyer is more than a tale of steel versus steel, or of 88 shells meeting 90 HVAP. It is a parable of modern warfare. Itself a study in the perpetual tension between the quest for an ultimate weapon and the adaptive, systemic response it inevitably provokes. The Tiger represented the zenith of a certain martial logic, the belief that a single, overwhelmingly powerful technological artifact could dominate the battlefield and dictate the terms of combat. It was the embodiment of qualitative supremacy, machine designed to instill not just defeat but despair. For a time it succeeded. It cast a long, cold shadow over the armies that faced it, becoming less a tank and more a psychological specter. Yet the American tank destroyer response, from the ungainly M3 half-track to the swift M18 and the potent M36, represents the other, enduring half of the equation, doctrine, adaptation, and industrial democracy. It proved that invincibility is a transient state, temporary advantage erased by intelligence, tactical innovation, and the relentless engine of production. The TDs did not meet the Tiger on its own terms of brute force. They changed the terms. They turned strength into weakness, making the Tiger's weight a logistical prison and its complexity a mechanical death sentence. They demonstrated that warfare is not a duel of champions, but a contest of systems. In the quiet fields of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes, the myth of invincibility died a practical death. It was not slain by a hero in a mightier tank, but by crews in open-topped vehicles who mastered their fear, studied their enemy, and leveraged their own strengths, speed, concealment, communication, and the unwavering support of a vast logistical and industrial network. They replaced terror with procedure and myth with method. Ultimately, this clash teaches that in war, there are no final solutions, only evolving problems. The pursuit of an unstoppable weapon invariably gives birth to its counter. The true legacy lies not in which was the better machine, but in the enduring lesson that technology alone cannot secure victory. Victory is forged in the minds of those who can adapt, who can learn, and who understand that the most formidable armor is not rolled steel, but the flexibility of human thought and the resilience of the systems they build. The Tiger rests in museums, a monument to engineering ambition, the creed of the tank destroyer, to seek, strike, and destroy, lives on in the very fabric of modern combined arms warfare. a timeless testament to the power of adaptation over sheer
might.